Good day. A cult classic, ladies and gentlemen, is something that doesn't quite reach the lofty heights of the mainstream. Sometimes things become cult classics because they're kind of bad, but they're just good enough that some crazy people like me like them. And sometimes they're works that reach market just a little too late. And today, we're looking at one such game that became a cult classic because it tried to come out in the shadow of doom. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're taking a look at Rise of the Triad.
Rise of the Triad was developed and published by Apogee on February 17th, 1995. Remember, Doom was released on December 10th, 1993. The fact that Rise of the Triad was able to do as well as it did was nothing short of amazing, and it was able to garner a pretty large following despite coming out in the shadow of Doom. I personally enjoyed playing it in the 90s right alongside Doom. Sadly, due to it being just a cult classic, it didn't get quite as much love as Doom and other 90s FPSs. And thus, getting it to run on a modern PC was rather difficult, as there was no GZ Doom or eDuke equivalent. There was something called WinRot, but that thing never worked right. So until now, we pretty much have been forced to use DOSBox. Yeah, that was great, and that's how I played it for years after my 2008 retro revival. But DOSBox was never ideal. You had the tank controls and low screen resolutions. Thankfully, the boys at Nighdive have come through for us and have remastered the whole bloody game and have given us a one-stop shop for all that Rise of the Triad goodness. Rise of the Triad, the Ludicrous Edition, was developed by Nighdive Studios and published on July 31st, 2023, and later for consoles on September 29th, 2023. This version uses Nighdive's Kex engine, so they are not bound by previous engine limitations. The Ludicrous Edition includes the shareware episode, the full registered game, a super hard version, and finally a new episode. You got all the modern screen resolutions, and you can use the modern controls or a game controller. And yes, Rot plays great with a game controller. You can even choose what soundtrack you want to listen to. You know, I might sound a bit like a heretic, but I much prefer the remake soundtrack to the old MIDI. The gameplay might have aged well, but MIDI gets old after a while. Like with their Quake 2 remaster, Nighdive has added back in cut content, and now you can be an equal opportunity ass kicker and take down female enemies. Who says there's no females in gaming? So, what the hell is Rot anyway? Rise of the Triad is a first-person shooter. Of course, what do you think? There's going to be a relationship simulator? The devs for this game, and they actually had a name back in the 90s, the developers of Incredible Power. They were so powerful that not only did they make this game, but many of them would go on to make Duke Nukem 3D, and you can kind of see Rise of the Triad as a Duke Nukem Zero in some ways. Rise of the Triad had a disadvantage from the get-go by using the Wolfenstein 3D engine. That engine could only do 90-degree walls, and it had a few other limitations as well. Wolf 3D games usually were very simple in terms of layout and objectives. Our developers of Incredible Power worked some techno-sorcery and gave us massively large and complex levels. Jumping was not really a thing yet, but they gave us some jumping pads. And each level isn't just a linear series of horrible corridors like in Wolfenstein 3D and Corridor 7. The game even gives us 4 characters to choose from. Each of the characters are more or less interchangeable, but they will have a few minor differences. Rot also gave us some neat little power-ups and power-downs. Each one is pretty idiosyncratic, and there's one that turns you into a dog. This concept would later be explored in the Heretic/Hexen games. The weapons in this game are handled a bit differently from the norm. You get a couple of pistols and an MP40. This is a holdover from when Rise of the Triad was supposed to be a Wolfenstein 3D sequel. These weapons all have infinite ammo. I loved this as a kid, as I hated running out of ammo in both Doom and Wolfenstein 3D. You can also pick up one explosive weapon that will have limited ammo, and these weapons are pretty bloody great. You got the pedestrian bazooka, but then you can get the firebomb and the flame wall. The developers of Incredible Power also added in some quirkiness too. When you quit the game, your character will be killed in increasingly edgy ways, and some of the bonuses will have funny names, and the entire game has a tongue-in-cheek feel to it. All this ensured that the game would stand out next to the mighty Doomslayer. But now we have to answer a rather important question. Is it fun? I reviewed this game back in 2010, and I was pretty positive about it. But unlike with my other first-person shooter champions, I have played Rise of the Triad only sparingly since then, and even now with the Ludicrous Edition, I have not played it nearly as much as Quake 2. The game is fun, but it's the kind of fun that doesn't have much longevity. See, in Quake 2, you can get in the zone and be blasting strong until the wee hours of the morning. Rise of the Triad doesn't quite reach those lofty heights. The shooting and levels are very slow. The first-person shooting is limited by the fact that you'll primarily be using an MP40, and just about all of the enemies will tank a good number of hits. And some of the enemies are even more bullet spongy, like this bastard with an M60 machine gun. Not only is he going to tank like 100 bloody rounds, he also makes an annoying pain sound all the while. And while the basic foot soldaten are not too annoying, they get boring to fight after a while, as they have limited animation frames and don't do all that much other than just shoot at you, and so you don't really have to vary your tactics up that much. The levels are where the game gets really annoying though. First, I gotta commend the devs for their incredible level design abilities. They took that super limited Wolf 3D engine and made it dance. However, they may have gone a bit too far. The levels are best described as a chaotic mess. In an attempt to liven up the levels, the developers of Incredible Power put a crap ton of bloody traps everywhere. Once you get out of the first few levels in the shareware episode, there are no straight lines to the exit. You know how annoying it is in Doom when you flip a switch and a door opens somewhere? For Rise of the Triad, that's the whole bloody game. The traps are the whole bloody game. Just look at all this crap. It's hard to tell what you're looking at sometimes. Then add in all the backtracking, and finishing Rise of the Triad becomes a rather difficult proposition. This is one of those games where you get to have fun for like 5 minutes, and then you just quit the whole bloody thing because you've been wandering around a level for 20 minutes looking for that one invisible touch plate you just so happen to miss. Oh, and the platforming. That's gonna get old fast. This is from the current year episode that's included in the Ludicrous Edition. You gotta ride this bloody anti-gravity train. But you don't just jump on it. Oh no, you gotta jump on it at an angle. Screw you, game. As a kid, I beat Rise of the Triad once, and as an adult, the completion amount has risen by 1 more. It's a great game, but it's just not that fun to play. However, I'm a much more action-focused gamer, and if you love a challenge, oh yes, Rise of the Triad has got you covered. And despite my complaints, I still recommend giving the game a try, as it is a fun, mostly quirky first-person shooting experience that one should have in their memory. But believe me, it's gonna get annoying pretty fast, so just get it on a Steam sale. Graphically, the game, despite being a chaotic mess most of the time, looks great. In the 90s, I thought it looked even better than bloody Doom. In current year, it still holds up in terms of level textures and gun sprites, and many a Doom mod would use that MP40 sprite. Enemies look pretty crap. Actor digitization was a pretty neat concept in the 90s, but unless it was done well, it can age very badly. The enemies do have some decent details, and we got male and female ones, but seeing as how these are digitized actors, they move very stiffly and they're pretty boring to fight. Sound design is bloody awesome. The guns sound great and the digitized voices are so memeable. Shoot 'em was something that was stuck in my head my entire bloody life. Music is god tier. Going down the fast lane, to me at least, was every bit as iconic as E1 M1 from Doom. The only problem with the soundtrack is that it doesn't really fit with what you'll be doing in the game. This soundtrack pumps you up to blast some bastards, when most of the time you'll be looking for that one switch you bloody well missed, and thus the hard rocking can get a little annoying. Story for Rise of the Triad is pretty basic. You play as a member of the Hunt Team. You are dispatched to take down cult leader El Oscuro. The main game takes place on San Nicolas Island, and that's your lot. There is sadly no deep lore for Rise of the Triad other than hot priest porridge heals more. Kind of disappointing, but I get that the devs are trying to make a fun shooter, and by and large, most of the time, they kind of succeeded in this. Timing is everything, and by the time it was released, Rise of the Triad had no real chance at even slightly wounding the mighty Slayer. Rise of the Triad, despite all of my complaints, was still popular enough to get a remake in 2013, one of the earliest boomer shooter remakes. Sadly, that game still featured many of the problems of this game, but, well, they were trying, and by and large, sometimes they succeeded.
If it's been a decade or two since you picked up an MP40 and fought the fell forces of El Oscuro, I highly recommend picking up Rise of the Triad and giving it a second chance. And so, I am General Lotz, wishing you good Doom, and good Doom 2, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and please consider leaving a like or a comment, as the algorithm desires your soul. And I want to thank all those fans who have supported this channel, both past and present.